All right, welcome back, everyone. So today I wanted to go through a bit of a post-mortem with all the CCU Warbond offerings. So this is just going to be a look at all 2025 Warbond offerings because I had some questions that I wanted to answer myself, and so the data looked interesting enough that I would share it with you. This is going to be a log one, so buckle up, get a snacky snack, whatever you got to do to get through it. If you're interested, I will cover some of the high points with the tabs, and then I'll go through like at the total listing at the end. So if you just want to look at the concepts, the higher costs, the higher savings, or look at them by cost and the higher savings, some of the analytic stuff, then great. And then I'll kind of cut from there. But anyways, let's get into it. So this is a look at all Warbond CCU offerings. Now, it's hard to even say if they call it still CCUs. That's still what people refer to. And this data is driven, this data set is set up by the CCU game, the extension that's offered for those that might use it. So this is data is based off of that. I didn't obviously personally keep track of every single CCU offering this year. That would be great if I could. I just didn't have that kind of time. And so I went through painstakingly and looked at each of them. So there could be an issue. I might have made a mistake, but this data is based off of that. And I will put this link in the description if you're interested to take a look at it. So initially, the first question I wanted to kind of ask myself is when was the minimum amount that was a Warbond CC was offered? And so what I've done, most of these sheets are alphabetical. However, this first one I decided to sort it by MSRP. The top one up here, Raven, so it doesn't really have an MSRP, or if it does, it's not like you're going to CCU up to or from this ship. That's just not something doable for that ship. So be mindful, some stuff like that, some of the data may be a bit dubious because of that. But I just tried to use the data they had there. So most of the MSRP stuff should be fairly straightforward, except for some weird outliers like that. Moving on down, you can see what I captured is if there was a CCU offered for the year, to kind of capture the overall look at that. There were 63 unique CCU offered. So 63 ships were offered at a Warbond discount, 86 total. So some of those were duplicates. And so I guess I don't want to give up these other numbers here as we move on down. Actually, I will. So honestly, the top 39%, so the answer to the original question is $100 is the first time a CCU Warbond was offered. So if a ship was under $100, which makes up about 39% of the total offerings, no Warbond is essentially offered or possible. So I don't know if that will carry on going into next year, as last year I think we'll find that the lowest offering was around 100 as well. It was like $90 or something like that. So it just happens to be that $100 seems to be the new limit on a ship on whether or not it'll be offered a Warbond CCU to it. So just be mindful of that. At least that's what the data is currently trending towards. That also means that about 40% of ships are $100 or less, though. So I guess, take that number with what you will. Now, you will notice that I did capture if there was a pre-25 offering, and I captured the most recent pre-2025 offering of that Warbond and how much it saved them, or how much it saved you. So you can see there were instances back in the day where they would offer Warbonds for ships that were under $100. It's just they don't do that anymore. And as we scroll through the spreadsheet, it's going to be increasingly clear as we find that there's no offerings until we get to the $100 mark of the Storm AA. You will find, though, that things like the Hawk was offered last year. Also, so was the Spartan, and so the Spartan was even $80. So there were instances of times when they offered Warbonds $5 off here or there, but they just haven't been doing that since, or at least for this year. And because there were so few of these offerings last year, I suspect they're going to continue this trend of doing no Warbonds CCUs for ships that are under $100. So just be that, at least again, that data is somewhat trending that way with this year, and last year being a pretty close indicator. Okay. Now, I do want to get into, before we get into each of the different offerings, that's the first thing I kind of wanted to answer. Up next, again, I have the total list of the offerings here. And so what I tried to capture is the name of the ship, that MSRP that it's currently at. If it's a flyable state, some of these are concepts. How much you saved, this is all in US dollars. Then the closest CCU, if you want to spend the lowest amount of spend, the cost between those two, right? So the MSRP, the nearest cost based on that savings. The savings factor is going to be the difference in the cost that you're going to spend versus the savings. So that's how much essentially how good your bang of the buck is, how much bang you're getting for your buck. The savings percent is going to be based around just that savings on that ship. So if you just end at that ship, if you do If I did an upgrade from my base starter ship up to the 600i Explorer and this Warbond I picked up, then I would have saved a little over 6%. Obviously, a lot of people increase these savings by having more than one, by creating a chain of CCUs. That's up to you. But again, this savings is just based on this one Warbond being picked up and how much is saved off the MSRP. How many times the offering was made, or how many counts were for this year. So you can see the Asgard was offered 3 times, basically offered quarterly since it's released back in June. And so if it was offered one time, it was only offered one time. But then I looked at the months it was offered. So you may find some instances where, like in this case, you can see there's 2 offerings for both of these 2 Hornets. However, they were both in the same month. So this month here is just going to be capture of the month. It doesn't then actually include the day. So it's just a month offering. And then again, if there was a pre-2025 offering, the last time it was offered before 2025, and also the savings there. So in some instances, sometimes stuff like the Asgard, not the Asgard, the Ion. The Ion used to have a savings over twice as much, or at twice as much. So $30 savings before, now it's only $15 savings. So some interesting tidbits to look through there. Concepts. So there were 3 ships. I just want to cover some of these as we'll go back through the offerings at the end here. However, concepts, looking through these here, you can see there were 3 ships that were some are actually, all of these are still concepts. And so they were offered at a discount. The Paladin is another good example. A lot of people look at the ships. CIG mentioned they don't want to do any more concepts as of this year. But I think that that's not necessarily true. As the Paladin, I see it as a concept ship. It just happened to come out in the same year. I think the TAC is also another good example. However, that was shared late last year and then came out this year. So I think concepts may happen on occasion, but it's just going to have a very short cycle period on them. But those are 2 examples of concept type of ships that did come out. Again, the Paladin was a Warbond offering, and so it had a good savings there before it came out. Okay, Ironclad, a good offering here as a pretty huge Warbond. It had a savings factors of 4 because it allowed you to go from either the Reclaimer or the C2. So if the $400 mark there is the C2 or the Reclaimer, you could have gone up to a Warbond offering for only $10. So $410 for that offering. And it allows you to save a factor of 4. So you're getting 4 times your money's worth essentially by a decent savings. And again, that factor will only go up if you picked up more than one of those and you don't plan on stopping at the Ironclad. It's going to allow you offering to save more money. Okay, up next we have the Merchantman. So this one's been offered honestly every year since 2022. So 2022 through 2025, it's been offered at both Alien Week and IAE as this $50 off offering. So be mindful of that. However, it is concept bound. The lowest cost concepts, or the prices I put as the nearest, this $25 cost is associated with these 2 concepts, which is the Liberator and the Arastra. So be mindful of that, as both of those ships, I definitely foresee both of those ships coming out before this ship, unfortunately. I think at the end of the day, the Merchantman will be more expensive than both of those ships, but just be mindful that, if the Arastra and the Liberator come out before the Merchantman, which is seemingly going to be the case, then your Warbond will become negative at that point, which again is okay, because at the end of the day, the Merchantman is when you would want to execute that, and that would allow you to pick that up. But also, again, this is a decent stepping stone, and the reason I say that is because the Merchantman, the Perseus, was using the Merchantman as a stepping stone. So if you waited to get the Perseus, or if you got it in a concept, I think even you could have, it was $25, because I think the Perseus was originally $675 before it went up to its newest $800 price point. So if you have that as a potential concept price, the Merchantman to the Perseus, that could be a good pickup. And again, this Warbond is a good stepping stone to save more money that way. The Nautilus is another concept, not a very good one, only saving about not even 1 times money there. It would need to be 70 to get 2 times money out of that. And it was a price factor of 4 if you picked it up with the Perseus before the Perseus came out and went up in price. So that was a cost of 10. That's what I picked up. So I went from my pre-launch Perseus $10 upgrade to the Nautilus. So I'll be holding on to that because that is now very negative, because the Perseus is now more expensive than the Nautilus. However, I do think, given that the Nautilus is more expensive than the pre-release concept pricing of the Perseus, I think indicates that the Nautilus will be more expensive once it comes out as well. So the only reason I picked this up, and things you might want to look out for when you're looking for ships like this that are in concept state that might be offered on a Warbond, is if you want to pick up that target ship. And that would be the only real case I would have picked up the Nautilus here, and that was my particular use case. I'm interested enough in the Nautilus. I'm still curious. I don't know if it's not something I'm stuck on, but I have it and now I have the Perseus, so it allows me a good opportunity to jump to the Nautilus at some point, and I did pick up some concept pricings for the Perseus. So yeah, that's a little more conceptual stuff that you're not necessarily going to bake in. Like, that's stuff you're going to have to kind of research a bit yourself. But all that being said, that sometimes when you pick up a war bond, it's possible that the pricing could get wonky on it, but that's especially in these concept pricings where you need the concept ship to come out to realize the real value you're going to get out of it. And the Ironclad is the greatest example here, is it's coming out probably about 6 months from now, potentially. I think that's my best guess, and during Fleet Week, and that would mean that whatever you spent, this $10, if you spent this $10 now, you're going to get quite a bit out of it, because it shouldn't stay at 450. It should go up closer, maybe, usually they go up about 10% once they come out of concept pricing, so it could get closer to that $500 mark. Moving on, by cost, this is just looking at how many duplicates there were at the MSRP points. So you can see at 150 there was a couple, because the new Clipper and the Shiv both end at 150. I also want to note that there's kind of this greenish color if there was only about 2 to 3 offerings. However, if there were 4 or more, I put it in this kind of orangish color. So yeah, the 175 and the 185 are both pretty heavily contested with a lot of options. So you can see because they have a lot of options, there was also a lot of offerings. However, some of them were better than others. The Retaliator and the Fortune were both standouts, as they were a $15 savings instead of just being a standard $10 savings. And that does change on occasion, as you see that they used to offer the Zeus and the CL, the CL and the ES at $15 savings, but they recently only did them at $10. So these kind of numbers do shift. You can see the Retaliator has stayed 15. So just be mindful of that. We'll talk about the Vulture later, but it's been all over the place. It's had as high as $25 off, which made it a factor of 5. So that was a $5 purchase. So there's definitely some killer deals in there, but those are old deals. Those were back in 2024. Actually, I think they were 2024 and 2023. So we'll look at that when we go back to looking at that one specifically. But again, right now we're just really looking at how many times or how many of these ships were offered as duplicates during this, because this is really relevant when you're looking to make a jump through this price range. You just need to be aware that there could be a lot of offerings because there's a lot of ships at that price point. 250 and 260 are also fairly congested, as the Max, the Infernos, Corsair, the Guardian. There's just quite a few ships that are in the 250 range, and again, there's a growing number in the 260. I don't even have the Mercury Star Runner in here, which just wasn't offered this year, but that's another good example. So there's just a lot of ships in these areas, and so you just need to be mindful when they come out with an offering, what that could potentially do as far as a stepping stone to get to where you really want to go. However, also be mindful of its connection point, because back here at the Defender, you see this 190. This happens to be the Zeus MR. As a matter of fact, all 3 of these use the Zeus MR, and that does kind of make it of a challenge, because the Zeus MR could come out, I wouldn't say any day now, but I think it's closer to release than... I wouldn't hold these too terribly long if you did use 190 or the Zeus MR as your breaking point here. Or your beginning stepping stone here. This is even worse here with the Sulin. I do think the Sulin potentially could come out during Alien Week, so it seems highly likely, or it could go out towards the end of the year, but it seems like if you did in fact pick up the Corsair, Guardian, or the Max with the jumping point of the Sulin, then you need to be mindful that there was great savings here, but you need to use that before the Sulin comes out. I guess you don't have to use it before then, because you can go negative. It's just, it makes more sense to use that before the Sulin goes up in price. Moving on here, there were some other offerings. These colors got a little bit messed up, but actually there just weren't a lot here offered. I think I mixed up. Yeah, no, it's fine. I did start this in Microsoft Excel because I'm more used to using that before I translated it over, so some of the colors might get a little wonky. That's about it. Obviously, there were a lot of ships brought out at 350 with the Paladin and the Asgard kind of coming out there, with some of the others coming along as well. But none of them were, and there's a lot of 290s, but none of them as congested as the 250, 260, 175, and the 185. So just a lot of offerings there if you need to go transition through those particular price points. High savings. These are the ships that had a savings of a factor of over 3. So if it was at 3, I didn't include it here. So it had to at least be over 3. And you can see here the best one did come out as the 600i at a factor of 6, so at a cost of $5. So the 600i was a $30 savings. You could pick up from the Prowler for $5, and it allows you to save $30. So it was a 6 times 5 here to get the 30. So you're getting 6 times that 5 value there. So it's a good jumping point, and it's a decent offering around that area to get moved through that particular range. I guess the other thing here is it's possible. So the thing that comes to mind here is maybe the Ironclad comes out at 480, and then you can go $5 to go to the Ironclad post concept pricing. Right now it's still 450, so that's not going to make sense right now to make that jump. But if it goes over 475, this is the kind of thing you would want to hold on to if you didn't have a chance to get a hold of the Ironclad as a concept price, as it probably won't come back for sale until it gets released, unfortunately. The Carrack, decent offering here. It came over from the whole D. That's the basis here, the 550. Yeah, nothing really of note there, just that it's a decent offering. Now, again, I mentioned before the Corsair and the Guardian. These are both anchored off of the Raylan. And then the Max down here is also offered off of the Raylan. So all three of these, they are good buys now, or they were good buys then because they were only $5 to go from that 225 to pay 230 to save that $20. Also of note here that Max was offered initially in late last year at $25 off, which was even the factor wasn't as good back then, but at least you could do a 220 and not have to utilize the 225 because it had that you couldn't even use the Raylan. Looking at some of the other four offerings here, a lot of those ones are the ones in the 260 range were decent. So the Guardian QI as well as the Meteor, they're anchored off of the Cuddy Steel. So that was a good savings there if you did get a hold of that. And we will look at the offerings after this, after I'm done here. And we will see the Steel was actually offered this year as well. It was offered, I think, in previous years as well. So Steel is another good one to look for. We don't see it here, but the Prospector is also a good jumping point. Usually a lot of roads lead to the or through the Prospector up to other things. Again, I already mentioned Ironclad, but that was a good savings point here. And that'll be a good, huge war bond. It's going to go up in a factor because if you've already bought it now, then it only goes up in factor once it comes out and the release pricing goes up. Again, it's at 450 now. Maybe it goes up above the 600i. I think 480, maybe upwards of 500 might be reasonable to think it could go that high. M2 was a decent offering here, coming in at 3.5 and the TAC. So both of these were decent pickups. Nothing super special, but I do note that it was 40 off in 2021. It just seems as of late it's been 35 as the newest offering. That's about it. If you wanted to see some analytics on the numbers before we go through painstakingly all the different offerings that were brought up this year. And I thank you for those checking in the video, but let's move on to the offerings. If you want to hang out, great. If not, thank you all for checking out the video and appreciate those taking time to like, subscribe, but let's move on to the overall offerings for the year. So these are all the ships that were at least offered one time, and we'll go through the data on how much it saved people, what the factors kind of were, and then some of the notes I may have taken in here. So the first one that comes up as a noting is the Asgard. It was offered quarterly ever since its release. So it was offered back in June, and it's been coming out quarterly as an offering ever since then, including its Best in Show. I don't know if it would have come out before if the Best in Show wasn't picked up. Or if it wasn't nominated, but I mean, it's a really popular ship. I think its price point's a good moneymaker for CIG. Unfortunately, it's just too expensive. I wish it would be closer to $250 or so. I think it needs to be $100 cheaper, closer to like the Starlancer Max. But hey, it is what it is. I like the ship. It's just one of those guilty pleasures, but it does make it a higher price point for people to get into. But it also means it's a good CCU to pick up when it goes on, because if you're interested in that ship at all, doing CCU chain to it makes the most sense. As unfortunately, when you do the chain, you'll get around, depending on how much you're able to save, but it's going to get it closer to the price it probably should be in real life. Well, none of these ships should be as expensive as they are, but it should, the CCU chain price will at least get it closer to what it should have probably been released at. All right, Ballista was one of the few that came in closer to the $100 mark, as well as the C1 here. These are good to see, especially like the Ballista, because you can get the Ballista to the Prospector. And the Prospector, as I mentioned before, quite a few roads lead through the Prospector because there's so many offerings at 175 and 185. Moving on through here, we do see that the Corsair, let's see, new minimum, it will be 220 after the Raylan comes out, because again, the Corsair is in this boat. A lot of these that are in 250, you could have potentially used the Starlancer Max, the Corsair, and the Meteor. All are around the 250 mark. Actually, the Meteor I think is at 260. At any rate, the Raylan was an offering before that you could have used, but now with the Raylan price getting ready to go up, it's just not going to be an offering you can use anymore. So this will more like be $10 savings. So it'll be more of a factor of two. That's all I'm trying to really say here. So it looks like a great savings here, but just be mindful that the reason that was savings was so good here is because it had the Rayland as a stepping stone, but with the Rayland price going up, that's not going to be the case anymore. Also, something like the Rayland's not in this data set, though it could have been. These are specifically for war bonds, and so Hole A, Hole B, Raylan, and the Raft were all good options to pick up. It's just unfortunate that not necessarily all of those have war bond. I actually don't think the Raft's in here. Yeah, the Raft's not in here either, oddly enough. So it was offered last year, but it's something that wasn't offered here. But those are all were good pickups. If you pick those up, we just have to wait and see what their prices go up to. Here's that Cuddy Steel I mentioned before. It's a good stepping stone as it has some of the other ships in the 260 range that do use it as a stepping stone. So be mindful of the Cuddy Steel as it allows you to get to the 260 area to get to where you might want to be going if you want to go above the Cuddy Steel. It's a weird one because it's 235. I think there's some at 230, the Antares, and there's some at 240. It's the only one. It's by itself on the 235, and then of course that price could always change, and that would really mess up with a lot of people's chains, unfortunately. Defender, I would make the same argument when we get to the Terrapins as well. Defender's in a kind of a weird spot where it does allow you to, if you pick this up, the 220, if you picked up the Raylan, possibly allows you to go only $5 to get up to the Raylan. So if you have some of those, that would have been a good pickup there. Otherwise, it's not a really good savings. It's one of those ships that's offered a lot. So if I look at Alien Weeks, it was offered in all Alien Weeks as a war bond except for 2023. It was offered in 2022, 24, and 2025 during Alien Week, and it's just one of those things that consistently comes up. But again, unless you're stopping at this ship or you have a target nearby it in mind, it's not a super good saver. Eclipse is another good example of not being a very good saver. It just doesn't save enough money, and the price on that ship is really high, and it's in a weird spot. $300 is just a weird spot. There's quite a few ships at $315 and a couple at $290. I think it stands alone at the $300 mark. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong there. I just can't think of a lot that are in the $300 mark. All right. Nothing major of note here. It's just we have the Tracker and the Ghost. You see the Super Hornet. All of these were offered basically once the ship came out. You can see here it was offered twice for the Tracker and the Ghost, but only because it was offered twice in January for each of those. All right. Fortune was actually a good offering here, as it is a bit of a standout along with the Retaliator. Even the Gladiator was a standout, actually. But that's because of the amount of savings you got for it, and it allows you to do a pretty good jump. The Gladiator, you got to jump from the 145 from the Razor. Because of the 175 mark and saving the $15, the best option here is the Prospector. So as I mentioned before, the Prospector is a good offering, and it was offered this year, so we will see it later in the spreadsheet. It doesn't save a lot of money, but because you can also save here, it does kind of make more of a saving out of it. Again, the Guardian stand out, but it's also tied to the Raylan, much like the Corsair. And so at later time points, 220 will probably make more sense. So it won't be as good of a savings once the Raylan goes up in price. So it's a standout now, but once the Raylan goes up, it's not going to be worthwhile to probably pick this up unless you're interested in it. It's just going to be a factor of two. I mean, it'll be okay savings. It's just not going to be a standout like it is now. Moving on here, the Guardian QI was a bit of a standout. It has a good savings to it, and it's, again, tied to the Cuddy Steel, which, again, was on offer up above with the other Cuddies. Moving on, the Ironclad was, again, a big pickup. The Merchantman, again, is a fairly consistent offering. I don't actually like the Merchantman too terribly much, as I mentioned before, but it is a good pickup to the Perseus if you want to use that as a jumping point. It was, at least back when the pricing, before the pricing changed. I don't think that's probably the best pickup anymore. Now you need to go $100 off. It's going to be $700. Actually, it might still be the good pickup. I think actually now, yeah. So even you still have to spend $50 to get from the Merchantman to the current Perseus War Bond offering. So yeah, that does kind of increase your savings. So you'd have to go Liberator or Arastra to the Merchantman, and then the Merchantman to the Perseus. That's just one of the ways you could use something like that. So if you don't have the Perseus today and you're interested in it at all, you unfortunately would have to spend quite a bit to get the Perseus War Bond. We see it down here. It's $100 off. It costs you $50. You're going to have to go from the Merchantman. So I would do that today. And then again, it should come up during Alien Week and Fleet Week. Alien Week, and it should come up during IAE, because they have consistently the last few years come out then, and that way you can get to the Perseus if you want to save some money on the Perseus. Meteor, again, a decent offering, again, based off of the Cuddy Steel there. The mole has not been a very good offering. It used to have a different savings. It used to cost, so they save you more money now. It saves you 25 instead of 20, but that just means the buy-ins differently. So you used to be able to go from a 280. Now you have to go from 275, which is the Sentinel, which also itself is not on this listing because it rarely goes on sale. It did go, I think, last year, but it used to be a factor of 4 when you can go to 290 to 295. Now it's not offering that kind of savings. Again, Nautilus, we've already talked about that one. That's unfortunately for my case is going to go negative for me, but I'm just going to hold on to it as an ending point for itself. The Nova was a decent offering because it was one close to $100 as well. It was spend $10 to save $10. That's the kind of savings you get at this lower tier. The whole A will probably be a similar boat. The whole B, I think, will perform better than that, but it could be in a similar boat as well. Okay, the Paladin and the Perseus both had decent Warbond offerings this year because they were offered on Warbond before they came out of their concept pricing. So when you look at the factors now, they're not super great. They're only about 2 or 2.5. But if you got into these before the Warbond, if we got into these Warbond offerings before they came out of concept pricing, then you had kind of a much higher factor. So if you got into the Warbond, it was $15 to save with a factor of 5, so you were saving 75. But again, it cost you 15. Or you could have paid the concept to go from 290 to 300. There's a lot of offerings at 290. Guardian MX, there's quite a listing there. That would have cost you 10 to go from 290 to 300 back before it was 350, and that was also a factor of 5. Again, the Perseus had a really good savings there. This has been mixed because it offered either a mixture of $60 or $55 savings. And so, depending on if you got it at $60 or you got it at $55, you either saved a factor of 12.3 or 9 because it went up by a significant amount of money. So, those are the kinds of things, again, if a war bond is offered on a concept ship, it's something you need to look at hard and decide, hey, is this a ship I want? Because more than likely it's going to get a lot of upward momentum once it comes out of concept. That's assuming it's going to come out of concept. The Ironclad is a good next example of that. As we looked at the 3 concept offerings this year so far, the Ironclad's the only one that's looking to come out. So if you pick that one up, it's already at like a 4. It's going to go up even higher, right? It's at 4 now. It's going to look like the 5, 12, or 9. It's going to go up significantly because the money you saved on it today will go up once it comes out of concept pricing. So those are the kind of war bonds you need to look for, is those ships that are in concept pricing. Polaris, not been a lot of great savings here. It was fine last year if you got a hold of it. It was also offered at 125 off initially late last year, back right before it came out, or around the time it was coming out. So that was a good savings, but now it's only offered 100 off, and it just is what it is. There's not much up there. So, if you want to get to the Polaris, that's probably the only reason you would want to get this particular war bond. Prospector, as I mentioned before, a lot of roads go to that. It was offered a lot last year. It was only offered one time this year. I know I personally picked up a few of these because it was spend 5, save 10, which was decent. So it was a factor of 2. But yeah, also quite a few ships around this price point now, right? So you have quite a few. The Shiv and the Clipper are both at 150 as well. So if you have those instead, then you don't really need the Prospector. Prowler was a decent offering here. Saving factor of 3. It didn't show up on my radar here because it's 3 is the minimum again is of the factors. You could change this if you want to go back through and mark all the 3s as good, then that's on you. If you want to do that and take a look at the data. The reason I kind of call out the Prowler is because it's $10 away from the Ironclad. So if you do have the Ironclad, ideally it's from the Prowler. And so if you pick this particular CCU up, that just helps you get closer to the Ironclad. Prowler utility, unfortunately, was not super great in its offering, and yeah, I like the ship. I've actually come to like it a lot more than its original release, and that largely has to do with its stealth rework. But that doesn't mean its warbond's been any good. Reclaimer, similar story here. Not a super good warbond here. It was spend 25, save 25. That's been disappointing. Looks like it's been like that for a while. I thought it was better in the past, but I think it's just because I would get to ships now. If you want to get to Reclaimer, I would get to something like the TAC. That would have been a better option, as the TAC would have saved you more money, and then you would just pay the $25 difference to get up to the Reclaimer. Redeemer, nothing super of note here. Just that 330 was offering for a couple of different ships. So if you need to get to this range, that's fine, but not a lot of standouts here. Retaliator was a decent offering and savings. Firebird, Peregrine, couple off. Well, actually one offering each this year, but they did have offerings as last year as well. Nothing major of note there. Scorpius standard offerings. As we move down through here, we see the Max was a decent offering, but again, it's the 250 mark, and so more than likely it's a $5 offering from the Raylan. So if you picked it up from 220, you're only going to save $10 and you spent $10, so it's a factor of 2 instead of a factor of 4. However, again, you're not stuck to the Raylan coming out. But additionally, it was offered at $25 off, as I mentioned before, late last year. So it was a factor of 2 at that offering. But it also only had 220 as the chance of picking that up. So TAC again was a decent offering, and this is where I would look to save money when you want to get to something like the Reclaimer, or to get to even the C2. This is a decent offering to get up to that particular area. If you want to get up through this range, the 330 again, we've already seen that the Redeemer was on sale. That was at Pier. So it was also a factor of 3. So it's not bad. So you combine stuff like the Redeemer and the TAC. The Caterpillar is also on this listing. It was back up above. It's a similar savings to the Redeemer did. So, and I do appreciate CIG when they offer stuff like the TAC. They offer sometimes with the Warbond. Sometimes they'll offer something like the Caterpillar that stands out like that. So if you guys want coverage like that, where I kind of show areas of opportunities like CCUs that are chains that come up, let me know. I can try to make content like that. I just typically let other content creators make that video. I usually either don't necessarily have time, but it's something I try to make time for if it's something that the audience really wants. Stinger was a new ship offering here, not a great Warbond. Also not been a great ship either. It looks great, but as far as performance has been more miss than hit. Storm AA was another low cost. It was our lowest cost offering this year. We also had the Cutlass, but the Cutlass is at 110. So there were some lower cost ones. It's just they're saving $5 here or there. I'm not even sure how much I really care about that, as I don't know if I want to really spend 5 to save 5 these days. I really want some of these meaty ones that you spend 5 and you save like $20. Like that speaks to me. When you're spending $5 to save $5, it's probably something I need to. I mean, it still saves you $5, but it's not something. Sometimes I'll buy multiple Warbonds, and I need to stop doing that, I think, for some of these lower cost ones. Terrapin and both the Terrapins, I mentioned this before, but it was, spend 10 to get 10. You could have done 195 here, I think, because 200. Yeah, so 195 would have made more sense. You could have done what I did with the Defender, which is the 195 would be the Raylan. But again, you would also be. Oh, sorry, it's the MR. Well, the Zeus MR is what you would go to here. Sorry. 190 is the Zeus MR. So you're saving $10 because you're going from the Zeus MR to the Terrapins. Again, I would only probably pick this if you wanted to go to the Terrapins, as there's not a lot of ships between this range that you would want to skip over to. I don't know. I guess I say that when some of these now, like the Max, it's 225, but the 220 range would actually be where you'd want to go. But the factor here would be less. So yeah, this is where if you want to stop at around 250, you might need some Terrapins to do that. If you want to go past the 250 range, you probably want to get a 260 and kind of skip over the Terrapins. Harbinger Warden, nothing really of note here, except to say that they were offered at deeper discounts in the past, or they've had mixed different discounts. I mentioned this as well with the Zeuses. They were offered at deeper discounts in the past, and unfortunately, they have been only $10 savings as of late. The Vulture I do want to note here, though, in its note, is it saved upwards of $25. I mentioned I would kind of talk about this. So it was offered 3 times in 2024, 5 times in 2023, and 2 of those times in 2023 it was offered at 25 off, which is a nice factor of 5. You were spending 5 to go from the 145 Razor to 150 to get the Vulture, and that was a really good offering. Unfortunately, I don't think I even remember seeing those. Actually, I wouldn't have been playing back in 2023, so I would have never noticed those because I wouldn't have been playing. But that's the kind of savings I'd like to see again, but unfortunately, I doubt those kinds of days have been largely numbered unless they specifically want to try to sell a concept ship, it seems like. Anyways, let me know if y'all have any questions. I ran through these pretty quickly, but I tried to cover as much as I could, and just looking through, blanketly what was offered here. If you want to see what other ships have been offered in the past, I've also tried to capture that here. Like I said, the Mercury MSR at 260, it wasn't offered this year, but it was offered, last year. So there's just some instances like that where it was offered previously. It was offered twice in 23 and 24. It just wasn't offered at all this year. So I tried to note some of that kind of stuff. If you're curious, like, hey, I didn't see this ship this year, I may have noted how many times it was offered previously if it was something that was typically offered but wasn't offered at all this year. Anyways, thank you all for checking the video. Appreciate you taking time to like, subscribe, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.